Under the hard white sun, the barn smelled like old hay, sweat, manure, and the kind of fear that sinks into wood and never quite leaves. Flies floated in slow circles, landing wherever skin was bare, unbothered by anyone's discomfort. No one swatted. People in places like this learned what pains were worth acknowledging, and which ones were simply part of being alive. The sound came first, iron dragging across wood, slow and deliberate. Not the clumsy scrape of an accident, but the measured pull of a chain meant to be heard. Then the whip cracked the air, not striking flesh, not yet, just snapping the space itself, a reminder that someone still believed he owned the room. Silence followed, thick as packed dirt. She stood barefoot on the platform, toes curling around splinters, embedded in warped boards. Her wrists were bound with rusted iron cuffs that had once belonged to a mule team, repurposed the way men repurpose anything when the law chooses to blink. The metal had rubbed her raw and darkened her skin in 2 rings, like the memory of shackles could stain deeper than blood. The war had ended 4 years ago. Cannons went quiet. Men came home thinner. Flags were folded. Speeches were made about unity and rebuilding and a fresh start. Ink dried on papers that promised freedom, like it was something you could declare into existence. But Red Willow County didn't live on paper. It lived on dust and hunger and old grudges that wore new names. The crowd was small, maybe a dozen men. Farmers with debt in their faces, ranchers with grief in their posture, a preacher with his collar undone, and his Bible nowhere in sight. They didn't jeer. They didn't shout. They assessed, like a drought had turned human beings into arithmetic. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his neck with a rag that had once been white and forced a grin that belonged to a man selling anything except what he was selling. "Next," he called, voice steady and loud enough to reach every corner. 18 years old, no husband, no family worth mention, no papers. He glanced down at a folded scrap he called a ledger. "Been sold twice already. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't work worth a damn. $5 to start." No one answered. A man spit into the dirt. "Broken," someone said, not cruelly, just as if stating weather. The girl didn't move. She stared at a knot in the wood beneath her feet, shaped vaguely like an eye that never closed. Her dress, once pale, maybe blue, hung in strips around her knees. Dust clung to her calves. A bruise darkened one cheekbone, half hidden behind hair that hadn't known a comb in weeks. Her name was Eliza Moore. She had cried once, the first time the cuffs went on. Cried the second time, too, when they shoved her into a wagon and told her to keep quiet if she wanted to stay breathing. By the third time, something inside her shut down, like a door bolted from the inside. Tears were a currency here, and she had nothing left to spend. The auctioneer cleared his throat. $4? Silence. 3? A man shook his head. Not worth it. Eliza's shoulders sagged the barest amount. Not fear, not surprise, just the exhaustion of being predictable. Then a voice came from the back of the barn. "I'll pay 20. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the heat like a blade. Heads turned. A man stood near the open doors where sunlight poured in, dust floating around him like smoke. His coat was sun-faded brown, the color of old leather. His hat was in his hands, fingers worrying the brim without him noticing. Gray threaded his beard. His shoulders sloped forward like the years had been stacking on him one by one. His name was Silas Reed, 58 years old, widowed. A man who looked like smiling had cost him something once, and he'd decided never to pay again. The auctioneer blinked. 20? He repeated. You sure, mister? Silas nodded once. No explanation. No bargaining. The gavel came down quick, eager. Like even the barn wanted it over. Sold. The moment settled like dust. And now, while the barn door still hangs open and the heat is still breathing, if you like stories that feel lived in, the kind you can smell and hear, tap like and subscribe. Not because it helps me, because it helps you find your way back to this kind of slow-burning world again. Eliza didn't look up, didn't thank him, didn't move until the auctioneer shoved her forward off the platform. Her knees buckled. She stumbled. Silas caught her before she hit the dirt. Her skin was fever hot. Wrong. Too warm for someone so thin. He steadied her by the arms and, without meaning to, his eyes dropped to her wrist. A scar. Small. Crescent-shaped. Faded, but unmistakable. 8 years ago, he had wrapped that very wound in a yard, still smoking from fire. A child, trembling under a wagon, whispering through tears, asking if it would leave a mark. He'd lied, gently, the way men lie when they want to be kind, but don't have the power to make kindness true. Eliza, he breathed. Her eyes lifted. Green, guarded, hollow in the way eyes get when they've learned that hope is just another way to be hurt. Something flickered in her face. Recognition, instinct, or an old memory trying to crawl out of a grave, then vanished. She pulled away like his touch was a threat. Men who knew your name usually wanted something. Outside, the gavel fell again. Another sale. Another life chopped into numbers. Silas paid with crumpled bills and led Eliza into the sun. She followed several paces behind him. The cuffs still clinked faintly. Each metallic sound hit Silas like a reminder of what he'd failed to do and what he was trying, too late, to correct. The road outside the barn was pale and cracked. Heat shimmered above it, bending the horizon until the world looked unreal. After a mile, Silas stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small iron key, the kind you forget you're carrying until you need it. No one should wear these, he muttered, crouching to unlock her cuffs. When the metal fell away, Eliza flinched. Not relief. Suspicion. Freedom arriving suddenly felt like a trap springing. She rubbed her wrists, but didn't thank him. Didn't ask why. Men always explained themselves eventually. Usually right before they took something. They rode through the afternoon until the sun dipped low and the land turned copper. Near a lone oak, standing stubborn against the flat horizon, Silas dismounted and tied the horses. He offered her water, careful to keep his distance, as if closeness might spook her into violence or flight. Eliza studied him like a wounded animal studies a hand. Finally, she took the canteen and drank. One sip, then another. She wiped her mouth and looked straight at him for the first time. Her voice was quiet, sharp. "Guess you got what you paid for," she said. "Do what you want." The words landed heavier than shouting. Silas knelt slowly, palms open so she could see emptiness. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said. "I bought you so they wouldn't sell you again." A bitter laugh escaped her, short and dry. "You think that makes it better?" Silas didn't answer. There wasn't one that wouldn't sound like a lie. The wind rattled the oak leaves like bones. "I knew your father," Silas said. "He was a good man." Eliza turned away. "Everyone says that," she replied. After. The ranch appeared near dusk. A low cabin, tired fence, land that looked like it had given too much and gotten too little back. Silence lived there easily. The first days passed with little speech. Eliza worked because work made men predictable. She fed the horses, hauled water, scrubbed the floor until her hands cracked. Silas fixed fence posts, patched roof boards, and tried not to watch her like she was a penance. They lived like two ghosts, sharing the same ground. On the third day, dust rose on the horizon. 3 riders. A badge flashed in sunlight. Sheriff Caleb Horn dismounted slowly, smiling the way a man smiles when he's already decided how the story ends. "Well," he drawled, "if it isn't Silas Reed." His gaze slid past Silas and landed on Eliza. When he noticed the scar, something shifted. Recognition, quick and ugly. Then his smile returned, thinner. "Didn't expect to see that face again," Horn said. Silas stepped between them. "She's under my protection." Horn chuckled and set a single bullet on the fence rail. Metal clicked against wood. "Just a reminder," he said softly. "Some debts don't die with wars." When the riders left, the dust they kicked up felt heavier than it should have. Eliza picked up the bullet and rolled it between her fingers. "Who was that?" she asked. Silas stared toward the hills. "Someone the past hasn't finished with." That night, rain came hard. Thunder rolled like the earth remembering. Eliza placed a silver pocket watch on the table. Old, scratched, initials worn nearly smooth. "You knew him," she said. "Tell me what happened." Silas watched fire twist in the hearth. "My father sold them out," he said. "Your family. For land." Eliza's breath caught. Silas kept going, slow and heavy, like each word cost him. "I heard him planning it. I rode to warn your father. I was too late. Everything was burning." Eliza's fingers tightened on the watch. "And you," she said, voice trembling. "You did nothing." Silas nodded once. "I froze," he admitted. "I told myself I'd fix it later. Later doesn't exist when fire is already eating the roof." Silence swallowed the room. Then Eliza spoke, and her voice was small in a way that hurt more than anger. "Why buy me now?" Silas's eyes looked older in the firelight. "Because I can't sleep," he said. "Because I'm tired of living as the man who walked away." Later that night, hoofbeats passed the cabin. Fast, close, then gone. Silas didn't sleep after that. Neither did Eliza. Part 2, 2,500 words. Morning arrived washed clean but not softened. The land steamed as sunlight rose. Water dripped from fence rails. Mud clung to boots. Everything smelled like wet earth and old regret. Silas found a fence board near the corral, shifted slightly, moved, not broken. A quiet message from someone with time and confidence. We were here. He didn't tell Eliza, but she saw his face and understood anyway. Survival teaches you how to read what people don't say. They worked repairs like work could still make life logical. Silas hammered posts. Eliza held boards steady. At one point, she corrected his angle without thinking, and the words came out of her mouth before caution could stop them. "You're lining it wrong." Silas paused, looked at her hands, then handed her the hammer. She took it like it might turn into a weapon in her grip, because in this world, almost anything could. She showed him the right way. How to sink the nail clean without splitting the wood. How to use less strength and more precision. It wasn't just skill. It was proof that something in her still cared about outcomes. When the fence stood straighter, they returned inside. Coffee tasted like tin, and yesterday, Eliza held the cup with both hands, letting warmth creep into her fingers. Silas spoke quietly. "When I first saw you, I thought you were someone else." Eliza's eyes lifted. "Who?" Silas swallowed. "The girl you used to be." Eliza's jaw tightened. "She's dead," she said. Silas didn't argue. Some parts of people die and keep walking anyway. He pulled a small wooden box from under the bed and set it on the table. Eliza watched it like it might bite. Silas opened the lid. Inside were small objects. Not valuable, not impressive. Just pieces of a life interrupted. A faded ribbon. A child's button. A tiny, carved horse with one ear broken off. Eliza stared, confusion creasing her brow. Then her hand moved, slow, hesitant, and she lifted the button. Her breathing changed. "That's my brother's coat," she whispered. Silas nodded once. "I kept what I could," he said. Eliza lowered it carefully, like she was setting something back into a grave. "Why?" she asked, and the question wasn't gentle. Silas's voice came rough. "Because I didn't keep the right things," he said. "Because it was all I could carry once the smoke cleared." Eliza stared at him, anger trying to rise, but grief beat it to the surface first. Thick, slow, exhausting. A sharp bark sounded outside, distant, but urgent. Not the lazy bark of boredom. Alarm. Silas's hand went to his revolver. Eliza stood so fast, her chair scraped. Hoofbeats, approaching, then stopping. A calm voice carried through the yard. "Silas." Silas stepped onto the porch with his gun visible, but lowered. Sheriff Horn stood at the fence line with two men behind him. Moonlight made the badge glint like a cruel joke. "Late hour," Horn called. "What do you want?" Silas said. Horn smiled faintly, eyes flicking toward the cabin where Eliza stood in shadow. "Heard you made a purchase," he said. "Unusual one." Silas didn't answer. Horn leaned on the fence rail like he was chatting after church. "There's talk federal men might ride through again," he said. "Ask questions about certain gatherings, certain auctions." Silas's voice stayed low. "She's free." Horn's smile widened slightly. "Is she?" he asked. Because I've seen papers, and I've seen no papers. Silas felt the trap tightening. Horn's voice softened the way venom does before it enters blood. Men pay good for certain problems to disappear, he said. And some stories don't need surviving witnesses. Silas's expression hardened. You leave. Horn tilted his head as if amused by bravery. Show him, he said over his shoulder. One rider tossed a bundle into the grass. It landed with a soft thud. Silas stepped forward and unwrapped it. A child's shoe. Small, mud-caked, leather cracked with age. Familiar in the way nightmares are familiar. Eliza's breath hitched behind him. That was my brother's, she said, voice stripped bare. Horn watched them like he was watching a fire catch. This is your warning, Horn said. Give her up. Walk away before you make it worse. Silas stood, the shoe hanging from his hand like an accusation. If you come on my land again, Silas said quietly, you won't ride away. Horn smiled, then turned, mounting his horse. She's not safe with you, he called over his shoulder, because you're not the only one who remembers. They rode off. Hoofbeats faded into darkness like a promise. Silas stood in the yard too long, staring at the shoe. Eliza stepped onto the porch, then down into the grass beside him, choosing where to stand. They're coming back, she said. Silas nodded. Yes. Eliza looked into the dark where the riders vanished. Then we don't wait, she said. The next day, a stranger arrived at the gate alone. Worn vest, travel-stained hat, hands visible. The posture of a man who expected to be shot, but came anyway. Name's Everett Pike, he called. I'm not looking for trouble. Silas didn't lower his rifle. Everett swallowed. I heard what happened in that barn, he said. Word travels fast when it's ugly. His eyes flicked toward the cabin window. Eliza felt that old sensation, being seen like being measured. Everett kept talking. Horn's building a posse, he said. Not for outlaws, for you, and for her. Silas's jaw tightened. Everett reached into his vest slowly and produced a folded paper. I was there 8 years ago, he said quietly. I rode with men I shouldn't have. I didn't light the fire, but I didn't stop it either. I've been sick about it ever since. He held out the paper. Silas took it and unfolded it. A list of names, notes beside them. At the bottom, Moore, Robert. Land acquisition, handle. Eliza stared at the ink like it was fresh blood. Everett's voice turned urgent. Horn keeps copies, he said. He uses them like insurance, but there's a federal marshal in Dry Creek, Harlan Boone. He's been sniffing around Horn. If you can get to Boone with that list, maybe you've got a chance. Eliza's voice came steady. And if Boone doesn't help? Silas met her eyes. Then we help ourselves. They left that afternoon, taking back roads. Everett led them along brushy cuts and narrow trails. The sky sat calm, which felt like a lie. By dusk, dust appeared on a ridge behind them. Too much dust for one rider. Everett glanced back, face tightening. He's faster than I thought. They pushed the horses into a shallow ravine. Branches snapped. Foam gathered at the bits. Far off, a shout carried on wind. Silas didn't look back. Ahead, a narrow pass cut between two hills. Through there, Everett said. We lose them in the choke point. They entered. Tight walls, little room to turn. Halfway through, Silas heard hoofbeats ahead. His blood turned cold. The posse had split. Riders blocked the exit, spread just enough to make a wall. At the center rode Sheriff Horn, calm as a man who believed the world had always belonged to him. "Evening," Horn called. "You folks traveling?" Silas raised his rifle slightly. Horn smiled. "Hand her over," he said. "You come back peaceable. Maybe you keep breathing." Eliza lifted her chin, voice steady even as her hands trembled. "I'm not going back." Horn's eyes narrowed. "You don't get a say." Silas's voice turned hard. "She does now." Hoofbeats thundered behind them, the rest of the posse closing in. The trap tightened like a noose. Then, gunfire. Not from Silas, not from Horn. From the ridge above. One rider toppled sideways, tumbling off his saddle. Another shot. Another man fell. Chaos erupted. Horses reared. Men shouted. Silas didn't waste time wondering who the shooter was. "Move!" he roared, spurring forward. Eliza followed, pushing her horse through the narrowing gap as Everett fired to force riders back. A third shot rang out, precise. They burst out of the pass into open land as the posse behind jammed into its own confusion. Men blocking men, horses panicking. The sheriff's plan unraveling in dust. Silas glanced up. A lone figure stood on the ridge, rifle steady, hat brim low. No wave. No chase. Just a calm presence. Then the figure vanished into brush like smoke. They rode until night swallowed the hills and the horses stumbled from exhaustion. Near a river grove, Silas raised a hand. "Rest here." Eliza dismounted, legs shaking, chest burning. Everett sat hard on a log, pale. No hoofbeats followed. Only the river hissing over stones. Eliza stared up at the stars. Too many, too indifferent. Those same stars had watched every sail, every beating, every night she'd been renamed and moved and silenced. She thought of her mother's hands, her brother's laugh, her father's voice telling her to memorize the land, because land outlasts men. Then she sat up and turned to Silas. "What if we don't just run?" she said. Everett looked up. Eliza's voice steadied, as if the idea itself built bones inside her. "What if we take Horn's papers?" she said. "Take the lockbox. Drag it into daylight." Everett swallowed. "That's suicide." Eliza didn't blink. "Living like this is suicide," she said. "Just slower." Silas studied her face. Not the brokenness, the stubbornness, the part that survived because it refused to be erased. "You want to go back," Silas said. Eliza nodded once. "Not to kneel," she replied. "To finish it." Silas exhaled slowly. The river kept moving, unconcerned. "Then we do it smart," Silas said. "We get Boone first, if he'll listen. And if he won't..." He looked at the dark hills where Horn waited, with his badge and his lies. "Then we take the truth ourselves." Everett stared between them, realizing what he'd stepped into. Eliza lay back again, but she didn't look tired now. Not the old tired. A different kind of exhaustion. One that comes right before something breaks loose. And somewhere out there, Sheriff Caleb Horn was licking his pride clean, gathering men who felt brave in crowds, and telling himself he could still erase a survivor, the way he'd erased a family. But Eliza Moore wasn't hiding under a wagon anymore, and Silas Reed wasn't the boy who rode home and pretended smoke wasn't on his clothes. The past was coming either way. This time, they planned to meet it standing. The river kept moving beside them, dark and steady, like it had no interest in what men decided to do with their lives. Eliza lay on her back in the grass for a while, staring at the stars, until they stopped feeling like eyes and started feeling like distance. When she finally sat up again, there was a decision in her posture that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not fear. Resolve. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. Silas noticed it immediately. He had spent his life learning to read what came before disaster. The way a man squared his shoulders, the way a woman stopped asking questions. "We don't rush this," Silas said, breaking the silence. "Horn wants us desperate. That's how he wins." Eliza nodded. "I know." Everett looked between them, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm something that wouldn't warm. "If you're serious about Boone," he said, "we've got maybe a day. After what happened in that pass, Horn won't wait." They rested only as long as the horses needed. By first light, they were moving again, keeping to low ground, crossing the river where the water ran shallow and rocky, letting the current erase their tracks. The land slowly changed as they rode. Less scrub, more trees. The hint of settlement ahead. Fences appeared. Smoke from distant chimneys. Dry Creek wasn't much of a town, but it was more than Red Willow ever pretended to be. They arrived just before noon. Dry Creek looked like every town built too fast and trusted too much in the future. False front buildings. A main street wide enough for wagons to turn around without thinking. Men leaning in doorways, watching strangers with the casual suspicion of people who'd learned that trouble usually arrived announced. Everett led them straight to a squat brick building near the end of the street. No sign. Just a small, faded flag hanging limp in the heat. "That's him," Everett said. "Marshal Harlan Boone." Silas dismounted first. Eliza followed, her legs stiff but steady. She could feel eyes on her, curious, measuring. But for once, none of them felt like they owned her. That alone felt strange enough to slow her breathing. Inside, the office smelled like ink, dust, and stale coffee. A man sat behind a scarred desk, older than Silas by a few years, his hair white and his eyes tired, in the way that came from seeing too many things end badly. He looked up as they entered. "Help you?" Boone asked, voice flat. Silas didn't waste time. He set the folded list on the desk and pushed it forward. Boone glanced down, then frowned. He picked it up, adjusted his spectacles, and read. The room went very quiet. Everett swallowed. Eliza held her breath. Boone looked up slowly. "Where did you get this?" Everett spoke first. "From the man who's about to kill them if this stays buried." Boone leaned back in his chair, studying each of them in turn. His gaze lingered on Eliza, not with pity, not with hunger, but with recognition. The kind that comes from understanding exactly what kind of story you've walked into. "You know what this means," Boone said to Silas. "If I act on this, I'll have half the county screaming federal overreach." Silas nodded. "And if you don't, he'll have blood on his hands." Boone sighed, long and tired. "He already does." Boone stood, walked to the window, and looked out at Dry Creek's quiet street. For a long moment, no one spoke. Eliza felt the weight of the years pressing down on that man's back. Years of choosing which wrongs were survivable. Finally, Boone turned. "I can't arrest him on this alone," he said, "but I can ride with you, and I can make sure what happens next doesn't stay quiet." Relief hit Everett so hard he had to sit down. Silas nodded once, grateful but not surprised. Eliza just closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself believe, just slightly, that daylight might actually matter. They didn't wait. Boone sent word to a deputy in town, then saddled up himself. By mid-afternoon, they were riding back toward Red Willow County, not hiding this time, but not announcing either. Boone rode at the front, badge visible, posture unafraid. They reached the edge of Red Willow as the sun dipped low. Smoke rose from chimneys. Dogs barked. Life went on, unaware that the ground beneath it was about to shift. Sheriff Horn was waiting. He stood outside his office with half a dozen men behind him, hands resting easy near their guns. He smiled when he saw Silas. The smile faltered when he saw Boone. "Well," Horn said, "didn't expect company." Boone dismounted slowly. "Caleb." The name landed heavier than any threat. Boone held up the list. "We need to talk." Horn's eyes flicked to the paper. Just a flicker. Enough. "I don't know what you think you have," Horn said lightly, "but this is my county." Boone stepped closer. "Not today." For a moment, it felt like everything might tip into violence. Hands tightened. Boots shifted. Eliza stood just behind Silas, heart hammering, but her spine straight. Then Boone spoke again, louder this time, so the men behind Horn could hear. "You ever wonder why the war didn't fix everything?" Boone asked. "Because men like you learned how to hide instead of fight." Horn's smile vanished. "You touch me," Horn said, "and this turns ugly." Boone nodded. "It already is." He turned and handed the paper to one of Horn's own deputies, a young man who looked suddenly very aware of the ground beneath his feet. "Read it," Boone said. "Out loud." The deputy hesitated. Then he did. Names, notes, the truth spoken into air that had never heard it before. Murmurs rippled through the men. Confusion, anger, doubt. Horn stepped back, his hand going to his gun. Silas moved at the same time. The shot cracked once. Horn staggered, more surprised than hurt, the bullet tearing through his shoulder instead of his chest. He dropped to one knee, cursing, his men scrambling backward like the spell had broken. Boone had fired. "Enough," Boone said, voice iron. "Drop it." Horn looked up, eyes wild, and for the first time afraid. He let the gun fall from his hand. The crowd that had gathered, drawn by voices, by instinct, stood silent as Boone stepped forward and cuffed the sheriff of Red Willow County. Eliza felt something inside her loosen. Not joy. Not triumph. Just the release of a breath she'd been holding for 8 years. It didn't end cleanly after that. Things never do. There were hearings, statements, men who claimed ignorance, and men who vanished overnight. The land changed hands again, slower this time, under eyes that watched more closely. Red Willow County didn't heal, but it stopped bleeding quite so openly. Eliza stayed on Silas's ranch for a while. She slept better, eventually. Not through the night at first, then longer. She worked the land, planted where fire had once taken everything. She stood at the orchard graves often, talking to names carved into wood. Silas never asked her to stay. That mattered. One morning, months later, Eliza saddled a horse and packed light. She stood on the porch while Silas leaned against the post, the way men do when they know goodbye doesn't need speeches. "I don't know where I'm going yet," she said. Silas nodded. "That's all right." She hesitated, then spoke. "You didn't save me," she said. "I saved myself. But you stood when it counted." Silas swallowed. "That's more than I did before." Eliza smiled then. Small, real. She rode away as the sun rose, dust lifting behind her like a trail instead of a cloud. Silas watched until she disappeared over the hill. The ranch felt quieter after that, but not empty. At night, when the wind moved through the grass, it no longer sounded like ghosts asking questions. It sounded like something finally settling, and somewhere down the road, Eliza Moore carried her name with her, not as a wound, but as proof.